Spiritual Theology, Part 23. The Diabolical Spirit. Normally, diabolical influence on the individual Christian is restricted to a simple temptation, although it is not likely that the majority of temptations proceed from the immediate and direct intervention of the devil. At other times, with God's permission, the devil may concentrate his power on an individual by means of diabolical obsession and diabolical possession. Diabolical obsession. Obsession occurs whenever the devil torments a person from without and in a manner that is so intense that there can be no doubt about his presence and his action. In simple temptation, the diabolical action is not so evident. Absolutely speaking, it could be due to other causes. But in true and authentic obsession, the presence and activity of Satan are so clear and unequivocal that neither the soul nor the director can have the least doubt of it. The soul is aware of its own vital activity and governments of its faculties, but it is at the same time clearly aware of the external activity of Satan, who tries to exert violence on the individual. Obsession can affect the interior faculties, especially the imagination, or the external senses in various manners and degrees. An attack on the imagination differs from ordinary temptation only by reasons of its violence and duration. Although it is difficult to determine exactly where simple temptation ends and true obsession begins, we can say that when the disturbance of the soul is so profound and the tendency to evil is so violent that the only possible explanation lies in some external force, even when there is nothing evident externally, it is certainly a case of diabolical obsession. It can take many forms. Sometimes it is manifested as a fixed idea that absorbs all the energies of the soul. At other times, the images and representations are so vivid that the subject feels that he or she is dealing with concrete reality. Again, it may refer to one's duties and obligations, towards which one feels an almost insuperable repugnance, or it may be manifested as a vehement desire for something one is obliged to avoid. This seizure has repercussions in the emotional life because of the intimate relation between the emotions and the cognitive functions. The soul, even in spite of itself, finds itself filled with obsessive images that arouse doubt, resentment, anger, antipathy, hatred, despair, or dangerous tenderness, and an inclination to sensuality. The best remedy against such assaults is prayer, accompanied by true humility, self-disdain, confidence in God, and the protection of Mary, the use of the sacramentals, and obedience to one's director, from whom none of these things should be hidden. Bodily obsession is usually more spectacular, but in reality it is less dangerous than internal obsession, although the two normally occur together. External obsession may affect any of the external senses, and there are numerous examples of this in the lives of the saints. The eye is filled with diabolical apparitions. Sometimes they are very pleasant, as when Satan transforms himself into an angel of light to deceive the soul and fill it with sentiments of vanity, self-complacence, etc. By these and similar effects the soul will recognize the presence of the enemy. At other times, Satan may appear in horrible and frightening forms in order to terrify the servants of God and to withdraw them from the practice of virtue, as one can discover in the lives of numerous saints. Or the devil may present himself in a voluptuous form in order to tempt souls to evil. Other senses besides sight are also affected. The ear is tormented with frightful sounds and shouts, with blasphemies and obscenities, or with voluptuous songs and music to arouse sensuality. The sense of smell sometimes perceives the most pleasant odors or an unbearable stench. The sense of taste is affected in various ways. Sometimes the devil arouses feelings of gluttony by producing a sensation of the most delicious food or most exquisite liquors the individual has never actually tasted. But usually he arouses an almost bitter taste in the food that is taken, or he mixes repulsive objects with the food so that it would be dangerous or impossible to swallow or digest. Finally, the sense of touch, which is diffused throughout the whole body, can be subjected in countless ways to the influence of the devil. Sometimes there are terrible blows upon the body. At other times there are sensations of voluptuous embraces and caresses, or God may permit that his servant be tested by extreme experiences of sensuality, without any consent on the part of the one who suffers these things. Obsession may be due to any one of the following causes. 1. The permission of God, who wishes thereby to test the virtue of a soul and to increase its merits. In this sense it is equivalent to a passive trial or a mystical night of the soul. 2. The envy and pride of the devil, who cannot bear the sight of a soul that is trying to sanctify itself and to glorify God to the best of its ability, thereby leading a great number of souls to salvation or perfection. 3. The natural predisposition of the person obsessed, which gives the devil an occasion to attack the individual at his weakest point. This reason is of no value in regard to external obsession, which has nothing to do with the temperament or natural predispositions of the obsessed. But it is valid for internal obsession, which he finds a fertile soil in a melancholy temperament, or in one inclined to scruples, anxiety, or sadness. Nevertheless, however violent the obsession, it never deprives the subject of liberty, and with the grace of God, he or she can always overcome it and even derive benefit from it. It is only for this reason that God permits it. One needs much discretion and perspicacity to distinguish true obsession from the various kinds of nervous illnesses and mental unbalances that are very similar to it. It would be foolish to deny the reality of diabolical action in the Word, especially since it is expressly mentioned in the sources of revelation, and that has proved countless times by experiences of many saints. In modern times there has been a tendency to exaggerate the purely natural causes of all phenomena, and perhaps the greatest victory of the devil is that he has succeeded in destroying the belief in his terrible power. On the other hand, many apparently diabolical phenomena are due to natural causes, and it is a fundamental principle advocated by the Church that one may not attribute to the preternatural order anything that can probably be explained by purely natural causes. The director will proceed prudently by bearing in mind the following observations and guidelines. 1. Obsession usually occurs only in souls that are far advanced in virtue. As regards ordinary souls, the devil is content to persecute them with simple temptations. Therefore, the director should first investigate the type of soul with which he is dealing, and in this way he will be able to conjecture as to the diabolical or purely natural origin of the apparent obsession. 2. It is important to investigate carefully whether one is dealing with a soul normal, balanced, of sound judgment, and an enemy of any kind of exaggeration or sentimentality, or whether, on the contrary, one is dealing with a disquieted, unbalanced, weak spirit, with a history of hysteria, tormented by scruples, or depressed by reason of an inferiority complex. This rule is of exceptional importance, and very often it is the decisive rule for making a judgment. It will be very difficult to differentiate between the manifestations of diabolical influence in those who follow from a nervous disorder, but it is possible to do so. The director should not yield to the temptation of oversimplifying the matter, of attributing everything to one cause or the other. He should give to the patient the moral counsels and rules that pertain to his office as a director of souls, and then refer the individual to a trustworthy psychiatrist who can treat the other manifestations that proceed from a mental disorder. 3. The authentic manifestations of true diabolical obsession will be sufficiently clear if they are revealed by visible signs such as the moving of an object by an invisible hand, the marks of bruises or wounds that proceed from an invisible attack. These effects cannot be attributed to any purely natural cause, and when the person who suffers them gives all the signs of equanimity, self-possession, sincerity, and true virtue, the director can be certain that he is dealing with a case of obsession. We have already said that the devil does not usually obsess the ordinary soul. Nevertheless, God sometimes permits diabolical obsession in these souls or even hardened sinners as a salutary expiation of their sins, to give them a vivid idea of the horrors of hell and the necessity of abandoning sin to be freed from the slavery of the devil. But ordinarily only souls of advanced virtue suffer the obsessive attacks of the devil. 4. Once it had been proved that one is dealing with a case of diabolical obsession, the director should proceed with the greatest possible patience and tenderness. The tormented soul needs the assistance and advice of someone to whom it can give its complete confidence, and who will in turn speak to the soul in the name of God. The director's principal concern should be to encourage the soul and make it understand that these attacks of hell are futile so long as the soul places all its confidence in God and does not lose its interior serenity. He will remind the soul that God is in with it, and it will help it conquer. If God is for us, who can be against us? Romans 8:31. Also at the side of the suffering soul is Mary, our tender mother as well as the guardian angel, whose power is greater than that of the devil. The director will advise the soul never to lose its tranquility, to hold the devil in utter disdain, to fortify himself or herself with the sign of the cross and with other sacramentals, especially holy water, which has great efficacy against the attacks of the devil. Above all, he will be warned the soul never to do anything that the devil suggests, even if it appears good and reasonable. He will demand a detailed account of everything that happens and will never permit the soul to conceal anything, however difficult and painful it may be to reveal it. Finally, he will try to make the soul understand that God can use the devil as an instrument for purifying the soul, and that the best way of cooperating with the divine plan is to abandon oneself entirely to God's holy will, ready to accept anything that God may decree, and asking the grace of never yielding to the violence of the temptations. 5. In more serious and persistent cases, the exorcisms prescribed in the Roman ritual are used, or other formulas approved by the Church are put into effect. But the director will always do this in private, and even without advising the penitent that he is going to exorcise him or her, especially if he fears that this knowledge would cause a great disturbance to the soul. For a solemn exorcism, it is necessary to obtain express permission from the local ordinary and to follow the prescribed precautions. Diabolical possession. Diabolical possession is a phenomenon in which the devil invades the body of a living person and moves the faculties and organs as if he were manipulating a body of his own. Diabolical possession. Diabolical possession is a phenomenon in which the devil invades the body of a living person and moves the faculties and organs as if he were manipulating a body of his own. The devil truly resides within the body of an unfortunate victim, so he operates in it and treats it as his own property. Those who suffer this despotic invasion are said to be possessed. However it may be manifested, the presence of the devil is restricted exclusively to the body. The soul remains free, even if the exercise of conscious life is suspended. Only God has the privilege of penetrating into the essence of the soul. Nevertheless, the primary purpose of the violence of the devil is to disturb the soul and to draw it to sin. But the soul always remains master of itself, and if it is faithful to the grace of God, it will find an inviolable sanctuary in its free will. Two periods can be distinguished in diabolical possession: the period of crisis and the period of calm. The periods of crisis are manifested by the violent onslaught of evil, and its very violence prevents it from being continual or even very prolonged. It is the moment in which the devil openly reveals himself by acts, words, convulsions, seizures of anger or impiety, obscenity, or blasphemy. In the majority of cases, the victims lose consciousness of what is happening to them during this seizure, as happens in the great crises of certain mental disorders. When they regain consciousness, they have no recollection of what they have said or done, or, rather, of what the devil has said or done in them. Sometimes they perceive something of the diabolical spirit at the beginning of the seizure, when he begins to use their faculties or organs. It is certain cases the spirit of the possessed remain free and conscious during the crisis, and witnesses with astonishment and horror the despotic usurpation of its body by the devil. In these periods of calm, there is nothing to manifest the presence of the devil in the body of the possessed. One would think that the devil had gone. Nevertheless, his presence is often manifested by some strange chronic illness that exceeds the category of pathological disorders known to medical science and resists every form of therapeutic remedy. Moreover, diabolical possession is not always continuous, and the devil may leave for a time and then return later to continue his possession. The devil can come and go as he pleases, so long as he has God's permission to take possession of the person. Lest we expose ourselves to derision, it is necessary to be extremely conscious and prudent in making pronouncements concerning diabolical possession. There are countless nervous disorders presenting external symptoms very similar to those of possession, and there are also some poor, unbalanced souls or perverse spirits that have a remarkable facility for stimulating the horrors of possession. Fortunate, the Church has given us wise rules for discerning fraud and for making judgments that are certain. The first thing to be recognized is that the authentic cases of obsession are very rare, and as much better to make a mistake on the side of incredulity than to be too anxious to admit diabolical perception. The extreme agitation of the victim, the blasphemies that are uttered, the horror manifested for holy things, none of these are of themselves sufficient proof. These symptoms give nothing more than a conjecture of the possibility of diabolical possession. But they are never infallible signs because they could proceed from malice or for some natural cause. Remedies for possession. The Roman ritual, after recommending prudence and discretion before making a judgment, indicates certain signs that allow for a diagnosis to ascertain the authenticity of diabolical possession. Speaking in a strange or unknown language, or understanding perfectly one who speaks in an unknown language, perceiving hidden or distant things, manifesting strength beyond one's age and condition. There are other similar symptoms, but the more numerous they are, the greater proof they offer of a true diabolical possession. Ordinarily, possession occurs only in sinners, and precisely as the punishment for sin. There are exceptions, however, when a diabolical possession is used by God as a means of purification. Whatever will weaken the will of the devil over a person can be utilized as a remedy against diabolical possession, but the Roman ritual specifies certain principal remedies. Sacramental confession. Since the usual childhood of diabolical possession is punishment for sin, it is necessarily, above all, to remove the cause of possession by a humble and sincere confession. It will have special efficacy if it is a general confession of one's whole life, because the humiliation and renewal of soul it presupposes. Holy Communion. The Roman ritual recommends frequent communion under the direction and advice of a priest. The Holy Communion, however, should not be given to a possessed person except in moments of calm, and one must take great care to avoid any danger or of irreverence or profanation, as the ritual prescribes. Fasting and prayer. A certain type of devil cannot cast out except through fasting and prayer. Matthew 17:20. Humble and persevering prayer, accompanied by fasting and mortification, obtains from heaven the grace of a cure. This particular remedy should never be omitted, even when all the others are used. The sacramentals. Objects blessed by the prayers of the Church have a special power against the devil. Holy water has a particular efficacy, as has been verified on countless occasions. The cross. Ritual prescribes that the exorcist should have a crucifix in his hand or before his eyes. It had been verified many times that the devil will flee merely at the sight of a crucifix. The sign of the cross has always been used by Christians as a safeguard against the devil, and the Church makes special use of it in the rite of exorcism. Relics of the saints. The Roman ritual also recommends the use of relics in the rite of exorcism. The most precious and venerated of all relics, and those that inspire the greatest horror in the demons, are the particles of the true cross, because they remind the demons of the definitive victory that Christ won over them on Calvary. The holy names of Jesus and Mary. The name of Jesus has a sovereign power to put the devil to flight. He himself promised in the Gospel, "They will use my name to expel demons." Mark 16:17. The apostles used the holy name in this respect. "In the name of Jesus Christ I command you, come out of her." Then and there the spirit left her. Acts 16:18. The name of Mary is also terrifying to the devils. The examples of this salutary efficacy are innumerable and fully justify the practice of Christian piety that sees in the invocation of the name of Mary a powerful remedy against the attacks of the devil. In addition to these remedies, which any Christian can use against the power of the devil, the Church has instituted other official means whose use is reversed to her ministers. These are the various exorcisms. In private, any priest may use the rite of exorcism. But for solemn exorcism, it is necessary to verify with certainty the reality of diabolical possession, and then obtain the express permission of the bishop for the exorcism. In addition, the exorcist should prepare himself carefully by means of sacramental confession, fasting, and prayer, and then perform the rite in a church or chapel, and only in exceptional circumstances in a private home. In the company of serious and pious witnesses, but only a few, and with sufficient assistants who will be able to control the patient in moments of crisis. The interrogation should be made with authority, but they should be few in number, as indicated in the Roman ritual. The witnesses will observe silence and remain in prayer, but should never interrogate the devil. The sessions should be repeated as often as is necessary until the devil is cast out. Once this has taken place and the liberation of the patient is verified, the exorcist should petition God to command the devil never again to enter the body he has just left. The exorcist should give thanks to God and exhort the liberated patient to bless God and carefully to avoid him, lest he or she fall again under the domination of the devil. A person may also come under the power of the devil by reason of the habitual practice of evil, or an uncontrolled desire to experience extraordinary mystical phenomena, or receive charismatic graces. In the first case, a confessor may, unknown to the penitent, apply a abbreviated form of exorcism when giving absolution to habitual sinners. In the second case, it is necessary to exercise the discernment of spirits when the person claims they have received some special grace or favor from God. Signs of the diabolical spirit. We have already enumerated the signs of the divine spirit, but since the devil may disguise himself as a good spirit and even cause what happens to be authentic mystical phenomena, it is helpful to mention briefly the various signs of a diabolical spirit. 1. Spirits of falsity. The devil is the father of lies, but he cleverly conceals his deceit by half-truths and pseudo-mystical phenomena. Morbid curiosity. This is the characteristic of those who eagerly seek out the esoteric aspects of mystical phenomena or have a fascination for the occult or preternatural. 3. Confusion, anxiety, and deep depression. 4. Obstinacy, one of the surest signs of a diabolical spirit. Constant indiscretion with a restless spirit. Those who constantly go to extremes, as in penitential exercises or apostolic activity, or neglect their primary obligations to do some personally chosen work. 6. The spirit of pride and vanity, very anxious to publicize their gifts of grace and mystical experiences. 7. False humility. This is the disguise for their pride and self-love. 8. Despair, lack of confidence, and discouragement, a chronic characteristic that alternates with presumption, vain security, and unfounded optimism. 9. Disobedience and the hardness of heart. 10. Impatience and suffering and stubborn resentment. 11. Uncontrolled passions and a strong inclination to sensuality, usually under the guise of mystical union. 12. Hypocrisy, simulation, and duplicity. 13. Excessive attachment to sensible consolations, particularly in their practice of prayer. 14. Lack of deep devotion to Jesus and Mary. 15. Scrupulous adherence to the letter of the law and fanatical zeal in promoting a cause. This characteristic readily opens the door to diabolical influence in reformers and demagogues. Once the spiritual director is certain that a person is acting under the influence of a diabolical spirit, he should 1. Make the individual realize that he or she is not a toy of the devil and must resist his influence. 2. Encourage the individual to pray to God for the grace to overcome the devil. 3. Advise the person to act quickly and with disdain for the devil, as soon as the influence is perceived, performing the opposite from what is suggested or felt. The human spirit. The signs of a purely human spirit had been described by Thomas à Kempis in Book 3, Chapter 54 of the Imitation of Christ. His words should be pondered carefully, for he explains the struggle between grace and the human spirit, wounded by sin and strongly inclined to self-love. The human spirit is always inclined to its own satisfaction. It is a friend of pleasure and an enemy of suffering of any kind. It readily inclines to anything that is compatible with its own temperament, its personal tastes and caprices, or the satisfaction of self-love. It will not hear of humiliations, penance, renunciation, or mortification. If any director or confessor goes against its inclinations, he is immediately branded as inept and incompetent. It seeks success, honors, applause, and pastimes. It is always a great promoter of anything that will arouse admiration or notoriety. In a word, the human spirit neither understands nor cares for anything except its own egoism. It is sometimes difficult in place to judge whether given manifestations proceed from the devil or from a purely human and egoistic spirit, but it is always relatively easy to distinguish between the two and the Spirit of God. It will be possible in most cases, therefore, to determine that a given spirit could not possibly be from God, and that it must be combated, even if one is not sure whether it is in fact from the devil or the human ego. The following contrasts may serve as a general rule for distinguishing between diabolical and the human spirit. Natural impulses and inclinations are spontaneous. They can usually be traced to some natural cause or disposition. The stimulation of the senses acts upon the interior powers, and they often persist in spite of prayer. Diabolical impulse or suggestion, on the other hand, is usually violent and difficult to prevent. It arises unexpectedly or with the slightest provocation. A mental suggestion excites the senses and disappears as a rule with prayer. Self-denial and rectitude of intention are excellent remedies against the spirit of egoism. In this respect, the spiritual director and confessor will do well to keep in mind the general rule for discernment of spirits. If there is a possible natural or diabolical explanation for a given phenomena, it cannot be presumed that it is supernatural in order. The following are the principal doubtful reasons or situations. 1. To aspire to some other state in life after having made a prudent and deliberate selection for the existing state. 2. To be attracted to rare phenomena or to singular exercises not proper to one's state in life. When God desires such things, he will give unmistakable proof of his will. The test is obedience and humility. 3. An inclination to practice extreme corporal penances. God has demanded of them some souls, but this practice is not the workings of ordinary providence. 4. A desire for sensible consolation in the practice of prayer or the exercise of the virtues. 5. The gift of tears, or the strong inclination to concentrate on the sorrowful and penitential aspects of religion. 6. Exclusive devotion to some particular mystery or pious exercise, which easily leads to a distortion of orthodox theology. 7. Extraordinary favors, such as revelations, visions, stigmata, when they occur in a person of little sanctity. The extraordinary graces do not necessarily presuppose sanctity, or even the state of grace. But God does not ordinarily grant these gifts except to his servants and friends. By way of conclusion, we again warn directors and confessors to proceed with great caution in making judgments in matters involving the discernment of spirits. It is easy to make a mistake. In cases of extraordinary phenomena, it should be noted that, as a rule, when these things proceed from God, the soul first experiences great fear and humility, and then peace and consolation. If these things come out of the devil, they begin with feelings of sensible consolation and satisfaction, but later they cause confusion, anxiety, and restlessness. Lastly, apropos of the inclination of some persons experience to change their state in life, and usually go to a higher and stricter form of life, the director will bear in mind that it is quite possible that a gift is given by God without God's wanting the person to actually to change one's state in life. For example, a priest who is actively engaged in the apostolate may experience a strong desire to spend more time in prayer and solitude. In trying to understand the reason for this strong inclination, he may erroneously judge that it is God's will that he enter the Carthusians or the Trappists. Such is not necessarily the case, however, for it may be the only thing that God is asking of the priest is that he be less involved in the whirlpool of activity, and that he dedicate more time each day to prayer and recollection. We would state the following as a general rule for the solution of such cases. If an individual has prayerfully and seriously selected the state of life in which he or she is, then he or she must present a serious positive cause for changing the life of state. Otherwise, the will of God is the present state of life, and practical tests is to see whether the individual is performing the duties of the present state in life with all fidelity. If not, the person should not even think of changing to another state. Psychosomatic phenomena. The foregoing discussion on the divine spirit, the diabolical spirit, and the human spirit serves us as a logical introduction to the study of extraordinary phenomena. Any phenomenon of religious experience must be attributed to one of those three causes: God, the devil, or some natural power. There is no possible explanation. Natural causes of extraordinary phenomena. The naturally caused phenomena comprised all those mysterious paranormal happenings for which we do not yet have a completely scientific explanation, but there is substantial evidence that they lie within the power of nature, such as telepathy, extrasensory perception, and certain phenomena of spiritualism. This subject belongs to the field of parapsychology. However, in the mystical theology, we have to deal with phenomena that have all the appearance of authentic mystical phenomena, but are really natural in origin, or blended somehow with the supernatural. We do not know with certainty that all nature is capable of producing, but we can know the nature could never possibly do. In other words, we have as our basic norm the principles of contradiction, which often leaves us with nothing more certain by way of conclusion than a mere possibility or evident possibility. In any event, the following rule must be followed most strictly. One may not definitely attribute to a supernatural cause that which could possibly have a natural or diabolical explanations. Thus two extremes will be avoided, namely, to see the supernatural or miraculous in very unusual phenomenon, or to refuse to recognize anything but the natural in any kind of phenomenon. The natural causes may be grouped under the following general headings: physiological or constitutional factors, imagination, depressive states, and illness, especially mental and nervous disorders. We should recall the teaching of psychology concerning the intimate relationship and mutual interaction between the body and the souls. Ideas, judgments, volitions can cause profound transformations in a person's somatic structure, for good or evil. The health or sickness of the body can in turn facilitate or obstruct the operations of the spiritual faculties. Moreover, the somatic structure, since it is organic, is so necessitated in its functions that it can react in only a limited number of ways. This is the basic reason why it is so difficult to determine whether a particular unusual phenomenon is supernatural or natural in origin. We might say natural but paranormal. It is also the reason why the theologian, doctor, psychiatrist, or spiritual director must, in each instance, make a careful and exact examination of the constitutional factors of the individual. The following physiological elements are of special importance in this examination. 1. Temperament. Of the four basic temperaments, the melancholic temperament is most prone to illusion in mystical matters. By nature, such persons tend to extreme introversion and extravagances of the imagination. Their excessive detachment from their surroundings could easily lead to something similar to ecstasy, and their vivid imaginations could produce what would appear to be supernatural revelations and visions. The choleric temperament, which is extremely impressionable, may give rise to the same illusions. A sudden and intense stimulation will sometimes cause a kind of hysteria in which the imagination runs riot, and the sense of judgment is completely balanced. Since persons of sanguine temperament are inclined to sensate pleasure and bodily satisfactions, they will be more readily be deceived regarding mystical phenomena of the affective order. It is not difficult to see how such persons would be prone to imagine that they are experiencing mystical touches, divine caresses, or consoling visions and revelations when in a state of religious fervor. But we must be aware of exaggeration in the judgment of such individuals, for although the director will be cautious in dealing with these temperaments, he would be mistaken to conclude that no person of these elements could ever experience truly mystical phenomenon. 2. Sexual differences. Women in general are more easily subject to illusion in mystical manners because their psychological structure predisposes them to a greater interest in religion, the practice of piety, and ardent love. Their somatic structure makes them more passive than active, and more sensitive to psychic love and tender feelings. They go to God more easily, but at the same time they can be inconstant, highly imaginative, and sentimental. Saint Teresa of Avila has some sound advice on this point. On the other hand, it must be admitted that in the history of spirituality, the women have far outnumbered the men in the reception of extraordinary mystical phenomena, and we would have to admit that the weaker sex is also the more devout sex, because women generally are vastly superior to men in their abnegation and generosity in the service of God. The imagination is one of our most beneficial faculties, and it can also be one of the most harmful. It has the power of evoking past phantasms, of creating new images, and of exerting a tremendous influence on the intellect and the will. If it escapes from the control of the will, it can be as capricious as the pages of a book that are left to the mercy of the wind. It is evident that the imagination is often the course of many illusions in the spiritual life. It is not the imagination that is as such is an error, for performing its function of recalling or creating phantasm does not have the power to say when the particular phantasms truly exist in the order of reality or are purely fictitious and artificial. The area comes from the judgment of the individual who takes as true that which is merely a fantasy. In order that spiritual directors may have a handy guide for discernment, they would do well to bear in mind the following principles. 1. The imagination does not create images in the proper sense of the word. It is limited to the recall or arrangement of phantasms already received, and it can contain nothing that was not received from the exterior world of reality. Thus, if we encounter a person who spontaneously speaks or reads or writes a language in which he has never had any contact whatever, this feat could not possibly be the result of imagination. We are in the presence of a phenomena surpassing the natural powers of the imagination. The cause, therefore, must either be supernatural or preternatural. 2. The imagination cannot surpass the laws of nature. Instantaneous cures of organic lesions, fractures, and mutilations cannot in any way be attributed to the imagination. If the cure cannot possibly be explained by the law of nature, there must be a superior cause at work. The generic title, Depressive States, covers a number of natural causes that may lead to illusion in the spiritual life. Sadness is one of the greatest enemies of the human spirit, both in the natural and supernatural orders. It makes the individual excessively introspective, self-centered, and anxious. This may lead easily to all sorts of illusions regarding either mystical phenomena or one's associations with others. Since we are concerned only with mystical phenomena, we shall enumerate the 3 causes of depressive states of spirit in this connection. 1. Excessive intellectual labor sometimes causes such a detachment from inferior exterior things that a kind of alienation of spirit results. The remarkable detachment and absorption of artists, scientists, and professors are the result of their intense concentration on the matter at hand. If the suspect suspension of the external powers and the alienation of one's surroundings can be explained naturally. Therefore, it may never be identified as a case of mystical alienation or rapture. Badly regulated mental prayer may also produce certain effects similar to those experienced by the great contemplative mystics. If the mental prayer is intense and prolonged, the truths of meditation may become so vivid that one takes them for realities of the sensible order, celestial visions, diabolical manifestations. However, likewise, intense and exclusive meditation on the passion could cause sympathetic pains. 3. Excessive austerities, which lead the exhaustion of the body and the weakening of the sensitive faculties, may produce all kinds of illusions that are mistakenly attributed to a supernatural cause. Long periods of fasting or corporal penances carried to extremes will so sharpen the activity of the imagination and the memory that the individual readily reaches a point at which the world of dreams of illusions is taken for reality. Moderate fasting is a boon to the functioning of the imagination and memory and the activity of the intellect. But once the body and its organic powers have been weakened, the sense faculties of cognition escape from the control of reason and cast the individual into the world of dream images. Illnesses of a certain kind are also dispositions to illusion in mystical manners, and it is often an area of dispute between doctors and theologians when what has been taken as a truly mystical phenomenon is declared to be the consequence of some bodily or mental illness. Both doctors and theologians should remember that, whereas the external manifestations are nervous and mental illness, and those of true mystical phenomena may be identical, the causes are utterly distinct, although sometimes there may be a strange and perplexing admixture of the two. Consequently, the most that can be relied on as a rule of discernment may, in many cases, is to judge by the fruit or effects. Admittedly, it is no easy matter to say that some of the saints at any time in their lives manifested the symptoms of some kind of illness. Neither is it derogatory of the sanctity of an individual to admit that some of the manifestations of neurosis, psychosis, or diabolism cannot be distinguished from the extraordinary mystical phenomenon. But the similarity of the external manifestations does not suffice on a basis for excluding that the manifestations in question proceed from the same cause, no more than the external act of virtue authorizes us to conclude that the person in question truly possesses the virtue. The theologian, physician, and psychiatrist, therefore, will do well to proceed with all caution in these matters, and to assist one another with the information from their respective fields. It is just as unfounded for a theologian to think that his theological knowledge alone will enable him to discern spirits as it is for the physician or psychiatrist to deny the possibility of natural influence in human affairs. Diabolical causes of extraordinary phenomena. The study of the preternatural is so vast and complicated that a thorough treatment of the subject would take us far beyond the scope of the present work. We shall content ourselves with an enumeration of the main points of theological doctrine concerning the diabolical influence. 1. It is de fide that devils exist, that is, a number of angels who are created good by God and became evil through their own sin. 2. With God's permission, the devils can exercise an evil influence over us, even to the extent of invading and tormenting us in a bodily manner. 3. In the midst of assaults of the devil, the human will always remain free because the will can be moved only in two ways, by the individual or by God. Most that any other intrinsic power can do is persuade, and this is what the devils do. The angels and devils can act upon the imagination and other internal or external senses, because these are all organic powers, and the devil has the power to exercise his influence on anything material. 5. The devils cannot work true miracles because by definition a miracle surpasses the power of all created nature. But since the angelic powers far surpass human powers, the devils can perform prodigious feats that arouse our admiration. By some of the contradiction involved, or because they surpass the power of an angelic being, the devils cannot do the following. 1. Produce any kind of truly supernatural phenomenon, because the supernatural by definition exceeds all natural created powers. Create a substance because the creation requires an infinite power, and no creature of any kind can be used even as an instrument of creation. 3. Raise a dead person to life, although they could produce the illusion of doing so. 4. Instantaneously cure wounds, fractures, lesions, because this is something only the Creator can do. 5. Make truly prophetic predictions, since the devil, not only by his own powers of intelligence, know future contingencies, although he knows so many of their causes that it appears to human beings that what was predicted was a true prophecy. 6. Know the secrets of a person's mind and heart, since the devil does not by his own power have access to the human intellect and will. Because of his superior intelligence, however, he can conjecture more and more easily and know the temperament of character of individuals as well as the numerous circumstances of their life. 7. Produce in human beings extraordinary phenomena of the purely intellectual or volitional type, because he does not have free access to the human intellect and will. These are principal things the devils are unable to do, and they should be kept in mind when evaluating mystical phenomena involving the miraculous or the activity of the human intellect and will. The following mystical phenomena, however, can be falsified by the devil. With God's permission, the devil can do any of the following. 1. Produced corporal or imaginative visions, but not intellectual visions. 2. Falsify ecstasy. 3. Produce rays of light in the body and sensible heat. There have been examples of diabolical incandescence. 4. Cause sensible consolations and tenderness. 5. Instantaneously cure sickness that may have been caused by diabolical influence. Produce the stigmata and all other kinds of bodily extraordinary phenomena, and any phenomena dealing with the physical objects such as crowns, rings, etc. 7. Simulate miracles and the phenomena of levitation, bilocation, and compenetration of bodies. 8. Cause persons or objects to disappear from sight by placing an obstacle in the line vision or acting directly on the sense of sight. Stimulate locutions by means of strange waves or immediate action on the sense of hearing. Cause a person to speak in tongues. 9. Produce bodily incombustibility by interposing some medium between the fire and the body of the individual. To summarize, all phenomena resulted in the activity of any natural power of physical law, even if the human being is unable to produce them. They can be produced by a diabolical power with God's permission. Whatever the activity of diabolical powers, however, it can never be essentially supernatural.